Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us here tonight. Thank you for joining Latina Professionals and the Latina Professionals California chapter. And my name is Isaura Reguin. I am the founder of Latina Professionals California Central Valley. And we have Hortensia Jimenez. Welcome, Hortensia.
Dr. Hortensia Jimenez.
Hortensia Jimenez. I know Hortensia from a few years ago, so we are really good friends. And yeah, thank you for being here, Dr. Hortensia. And let's give a couple of minutes for people to join us. But in the meantime, feel free to put where are you from? Where are you tuning in from? What city? And we'll just give a couple of minutes. But in the meantime, I wanted to share that Dr. Hortensia Jimenez is from Xarica, Nayarit, and she has a BA and a master's and a PhD in sociology, and she's also certified intuitive eating counselor. And she wrote a book which is called Challenging Inequalities. Readings in Race, Ethnicity, and Immigration. And she's a co editor of Next Experiences. Yes, we have people from Chicago. Wow, Dalila, Mayra from San Diego. Thank you for joining us today. Gracias, amigas, por estar esta tarde con nosotros. And I just wanted to talk to you, Hortensia, because as Latinas, a lot of us have gone through losses in our lives, and this is a topic that with my friends, colleagues, and others around us, we've discovered that in the Latino community is a topic that it becomes like a taboo many times. I lost my parents 2 years ago. They both passed within 5 months of difference, and I'm an only child. So I discovered that el duelo, ese proceso, can be very lonely in the Latino community.
Yeah.
And I think it's not because people don't want to help, but we do not know how.
Yeah.
Most of us were raised. I remember when I was little, it was like in Mexico, you have the funeral, then you have the novenarios, and then it was like, oh, sometimes you don't touch the subject anymore, and it becomes really lonely.
Yeah. That's right. No, thank you so much, Isaura, for the invitation and for everyone who's joining. Muchísimas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros in community to talk about grief and how hard grief can be, especially when you don't have a support system, and especially in a capitalist society like the United States that doesn't have a culture of grief and support. So I just wanted to just acknowledge that, and also, again, give you my condolences for losing both of your parents. I can only imagine how difficult that has been and how hard it still is, porque a veces la gente dice, no, pues que ya fallecieron hace un año, dos, cinco, 10, porque todavía les está llorando. And it's like, wow, es fácil que la gente te diga, pero pues solamente tu corazoncito, ¿verdad? Tu espíritu sabe el duelo, ¿no? El dolor que tú llevas en tu corazón. And we're here to talk and to be vulnerable, to share our own experiences, and also to invite you to honor your grief, whatever grief that you're carrying in your heart.
Yes, because grief is a very it involves many areas, not just when you lost somebody, passing away, pero a veces you lost a job that you loved. People lose their relationships or their house, or
Mhm.
they go in bankruptcy, so that's a loss as well. And again, those are topics that mainly in our community are hidden behind, muchas veces porque nos da pena, muchas veces because we don't want to be vernos vulnerables.
Yeah.
So what, in your experience, what would be one of the best advices you could give to someone that is going through this and that has felt lonely and that has had people even within their own families that come to them and they're like, well, es que no sabía qué decirte, es que no sé cómo acercarme a ti, es que me daba pena, es que there's no words. And how within your experience working with a lot of people in the community, mentoring a lot of students, how have you, what would be the best recommendation you can give to someone?
Sí, claro. Yes. And if you don't mind, before I answer that, if I can cover like what grief is and the different types of grief, and maybe the grief cycle, and then I can address that maybe a little
Definitely.
más
You
adelante.
are welcome
Just
to guide us.
see. So when we think about grief, oftentimes folks think is when you lose someone, that someone passes away, like a family member, a loved one. And it's true, grief is, it is associated with, losing a loved one, a death. But grief is like having this feeling of sadness, of anger, and going through different phases of those feelings, which is very complicated, very messy, and very nuanced. Sometimes it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't have to make sense, because one thing is like what we are thinking and the other is like what we're feeling, and then the embodiment experience. So I just want to acknowledge that grief is very, very complex, but it's a feeling of loss. And having said that, right, the feeling of losing a loved one, but it's also let's talk about the different ways that people who are watching can I start identifying. My invitation is for you to identify what grief have I experienced in my life that maybe I never named it because I didn't have a language, or maybe I just haven't accepted it, right? So losing a loved one, losing a pet, and that people get shamed for like, ¿para qué le llevas un perro o a un pájaro o un gato? You lost a pet, you lost a family, you lost a family member, and from my indigeneity, it's like animals are sacred, animals are spirit animals, so they play such an important part in our lives too. So losing a pet is not the same thing as losing a human being. I'm not here to like put them like this, but to say losing a pet is also valid, and it's a loss. Also, grief is also losing relationships, either like romantic relationship, like a breakup, the end of a marriage, divorce, breakups. That is also part of grief. Another one is health. If you have a health condition, and you're grieving when you didn't have that health condition, you were in a car accident and things are not the same anymore in your life. There's a sense of loss. That's what grief is at its core. Es una pérdida, ¿no? Y todas las pérdidas que tienes en tu vida son válidas. But because we live in this toxic society with very oppressive narratives that say, no llores, eso no es importante. I'm here to tell you all the losses that you've experienced are valid, from health, loved ones, pets, friendships. It's another one. And you know what? For me, that has been now in my adult life. I was like, wow, so I've experienced not only the loss of losing a loved one, but in that journey, I had to let go of friendship, of people in my life. And that is hard. So there's a lot of those relationships, colleagues, a mis, colegas que también you have to let go. Sometimes there's a loss. A veces te fallan, como dicen por ahí, te dan como esa puñalada por la espalda, or sometimes it's like
Yeah.
people take advantage of you and you have to let go of those collegiate relationships. So there's that loss of that too, right? Of your coworkers, your colleagues. Um, Also loss of identity too, especially for those of us who are immigrants, or if you're first gen, the life transitions, the loss of certain stages of your life. Another type of grief is, which I also focus on my current research, because I go through different phases of different research, and right now I do a lot of work around food and body image. And there is, and I didn't coin this concept. Her name is Bree. Is body grief, is also grieving the body that you had before you had kids. For example, how your body has changed over the decades. For women who are in their 40s or 50s and they're in a premenopause or menopause phase, el cuerpo que tienen ahorita es diferente al que tenían hace 30, 20 años. And there's a loss of that body, right? That some people are still trying to hold on. So even
And
body is.
yeah,
So
and
just to talk the spectrum, right? The spectrum
it
of
is.
different types of
Right.
grief, and they're all valid.
It is interesting that everything that you're mentioning, because when you're going through any type of grief, you not only are learning how to deal with grief, with the loss, but you're learning to be yourself again. You really
Yeah.
discover a new self. It's a before and after that loss. And it's where the support system makes a difference. And going back to what we were saying earlier, we in our culture is something that many times it's set aside because it's just not something it's passed by generations. It's something that we
Sí.
don't have the ability to change. So this conversation makes such a difference. I've appreciated who came to me, and I had them invite me for lunch or coffee, and and I had the opportunity to talk about. So it's being open
Ujú.
and being
Yeah.
receptive and empathetic.
Claro, eso creo que como dijiste, ¿no? ¿Qué son las recomendaciones? And, show up in your humanity. And, it's so easier said than done. Some folks can't do that. Some folks are not able to show up that way for others because they have their own traumas. They all have their own stuff going on, right? But show up from a place of compassion and care for that person that is experiencing a loss without judgment. And I noticed that, in my own family and on the community is like, por eso dije, like, we don't want to place grief and the different losses in a hierarchy because that is harmful. You can't say this sort of grief, this loss is more important than this one. No, porque solamente la persona que está pasando por eso sabe. So my first foremost, invitation is you are no one to judge someone else or to tell them or even to shame them or criticize them or about their loss. You're there to honor them. You're there to hold space for that grief. That's the first thing. And we can talk about like what other things you can do. Eso es lo primero. You don't go in there. You do not go in there saying, well, I know because I went through this. Y así son las cosas. Déjate digo. It's not about you. It's never about you. You're there to be of service, to listen and hold space for the other person and be supportive. And when asked, you can share your experience, but you don't want to overpower your own experience with their grief and their feelings because then you're invalidating and it's a form of invisibility of their own loss and what they're going through and putting you in this kind of spotlight when it's about what they're going through.
Exactly. And another type of grief that I've seen, and it's when your kids leave your home, right? Us
Oh
Latinos are very familia orientados, y las mamás, we don't want the kids to leave. And that's another type of grief, like, oh,
oh
mi
my
hijo,
god.
they get married or they go to college. That is another type of grief. But yeah, it's important to with this space show others that being empathetic and showing
Claro.
up.
Yeah.
And
I interject? Isara, can I interject? Because that's actually
certainly,
important what you just mentioned. Because my kids haven't gone off to college yet, but for those who are watching and have their children who are now adults and at the university, there's that sense of loss too of your children are adults, they're independent, so there's that loss right there. And I want to also kind of just that reminded me of my own kids. I have a preteen who's 12 and two teenagers, 15 and soon to be 17. And I was able to identify it probably last year. I was like, oh, okay, I'm experiencing grief, the loss of my youngest daughter. It's just like, ya no es una bebé, she's a preteen. Like I was grieving not being able to be close to my kids, like to hug them and kiss them, because ahorita no se dejan. When they were younger, they did. So it was hard for me when my kids were transitioning to a preteen and teenagers. And I can only imagine that grief that I will experience when they leave the home and go to
exactly,
the university. So thank you for reminding
exactly.
me of that.
No, and everyone that is right now joining us probably has been through many different types of grief. But again, it's every time you lose something, like you said, a career, a colleague, a friend, some loved one, es
Sí,
como que you are reborn, and then you have to, like, you're broken, and then you have to put those pieces back together, but then it
sí.
doesn't get back as it was. And and another way that I found in my own experience, um, a way to cope with it was through therapy. um,
Yes.
and some of us come with backgrounds that, like, no, la terapia no sirve, o para qué, si no estás loco. And no, it really, we're humans, and you realize when you have those huge losses, that
Yeah.
even though we are, as Latinos, Latinas, super independent, and that you can't do it on your own. And it's
Yeah.
okay to say I can't do it, and it's okay even if you have a great support system. No one is gonna understand what you're going through, even if they already went through it, because we're different. And it's
Yes, exactamente. Yes,
hard
absolutely.
to
Having
talk
that
to them
support
and be
system.
like, you know what, I love your support, but I really can't do it on my own. And
Yeah.
getting help, it makes a huge difference.
Sí, sí, tienes razón. Creo que, we need to normalize, and that's why we're having this plática, right? To normalize that grief is real, that there different forms of grief, that we need to normalize a conversation and ask for help. And, asking for help is hard, and it's harder for men. It's a lot harder for men to ask for help because, of the social conditioning, because of patriarchy, of toxic masculinity. So, sí es difícil para nosotros, las mujeres, las latinas, es mucho más difícil para un hombre, Entonces, tenemos que reconocer that gender dynamic, right? The difference. But taking that first step and having that support system, that's actually a strength, I feel like crying. It's a strength because when my grandmother passed away, I was a mess because my grandma raised me. She was like my second mother, and she was my father's mother. And I lost my father when I was an undergrad. So it's like, oh, I feel like I lost a big part of who I am, my identity. Y yo me acuerdo que lloraba y lloraba, y a veces me enojaba de tanto que lloraba y de sentirme tanta tristeza y soledad y que nadie me entendía y que me decían que dejara de llorar. Pero llegó un momento cuando dije, you know what? My vulnerability is my superpower. And I began to shift that narrative because that's what we are told. No llores, no seas llorona, you're weak. Like crying is a sign of weakness. And especially when you're grieving, crying for me has been healing. And from an indigenous epistemology, crying is also reclaiming our ancestors' pain, claiming the pain that our ancestors weren't able to cry. So when I was crying, I was healing the women in my lineage. I was healing my ancestors. I was healing my grandmother who was not allowed to cry. And that's why I cried so much. It's like it's liberating. It's decolonizing our emotions, Isaura. That's how powerful grief can be for healing. And I'm here to tell you as a professor, as a person, as a sociologist, as a woman of indigenous ancestry, to decolonize our emotions. And decolonize our emotions during grief, it is so powerful because you don't want to shame and judge your feelings. You want to honor them, and you want to think about your lineage and how our ancestors weren't allowed to express themselves, weren't allowed to cry. Like the women in my life. I have women in my life, elders. One woman in my life who can't cry. No puede llorar. No puede llorar, no puede llorar. Así está el trauma en su cuerpo que no puede
Yeah,
llorar.
it's and doing this type of conversations, having the audience here, we're breaking those patterns and making that difference, and our child are gonna see, or everybody around us are gonna see that it's okay to
Yes.
let your feelings out, and it's
Mhm.
okay to express if you're feeling anger, not because you're
Sí.
angry and yeah, you experience anger. To be honest, with grief,
Claro.
you experience
Yeah,
anger.
of course.
And we're told like, es que no, como, casi you're gonna go to hell. But no, you experience
Yeah.
anger. You don't understand. You feel like you're going crazy. You
Mhm.
feel like you're not yourself anymore. Like your
Mm.
soul left your body. You don't
Sí,
understand it. And it's when you really have that desire, like that cry for help,
sí,
but sometimes there's not that empathy there. It is not.
claro,
And I remember my grandma, she passed away in October of last year too. So within the past year, I've had three big losses in my life, the past 2 years, sorry. And I recall when she would visit me here in California, she she would be always quiet. And I had asked her one time, well, ¿por qué no habla? ¿Por qué no opina usted? Given that new generations were very opinionated. Me decía, es que no puedo. Cuando yo crecí, I couldn't speak. Era de que no, yo no puedo hablar, yo no puedo hablar. So imagine all of that she had
yeah,
internal,
yes,
that she would have loved to share, that she would have loved
yeah,
to express. And it touched me what you were saying about your grandma. It's the same pattern, and we have that in our own families now.
claro que sí. Sí, claro, there's a couple things I want to say based on what you just shared, and thank you, one is like, no, especially for those who are mothering, not only like, but birthing, having children, but mothering, like if you're a teacher, if you're like showing love and care, you're caring for others, to tell the people that you're mothering, that you're caring for, that showing love and affection is normalize and say, I'm having a tough day, I've been using the word tender, I'm feeling tender, and that means like, oh, I'm feeling sad or I'm having a tough mental health day, I'll tell my kids. And even though my kids might feel uncomfortable me telling them or even me crying, porque soy bien llorona and I normalize it at home, I want my kids to know that it's okay to cry, that like I cry, that it's okay and there's no judgment, even though it makes them uncomfortable. I rather have my kids feel uncomfortable now, that way it's not foreign to them when they get older. So of course, we also want to be safe and do it with in safe spaces, with people that we trust, porque tú sabes, de todas maneras hay gente que pues sí se puede aprovechar de tu vulnerabilidad, right? And we definitely don't want that. So it's also you want to also gauge, where are those safe spaces, but especially with our children, we want to model, we want to break generational cycles of trauma and also of concealing and masking. Masking that no pasa nada, pero por dentro te estás muriendo. No, like hay que hablar de estas cosas
Exactly.
en familias con nuestros with our elders in a respectful way and invite them. But it takes us, it takes you, me, and the people who are listening to have these conversations and to lead, to be the example, to break these cycles.
Exactly. And once your kids or those around you see you go through this experience, how you process it, you're teaching them to be prepared. No, you can't be prepared 100%, of course not. But at least um if at some point they go through grief, they'll have that understanding, uh, or they have had seen somebody going through it, and being open about it, being crying out. It's
Mhm.
gonna make that a huge difference. But I noticed it with my daughters when I was going through the loss. I did the same thing. Like, you know what? I really feel that I'm broken,
Yeah.
and it helped them understand that mom was in pain, but
Yeah.
and also help them see, like they really
Yeah.
saw somebody broken, and they were able to process it, understand it, and become more empathetic. And as time passed, now 2 years, almost 3 years after, I noticed they really understood, and they really realized like my days when they're up and down, because as a it's something else that Hortensia, grief is something that it's not gonna go away a los 9 días that
Sí,
somebody passed away, or at 6 months. It even gets harder
sí,
on any loss as time passes.
claro. Claro que sí. And I would like to talk about the grief cycle. And so the grief cycle was coined or popularized by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in a book that she wrote in 1969. The book is called On Death and Dying. And she talks about, so she's the one that's cited when we talk about grief and the grief cycle. She's kind of like the foundation, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She talks about the 5 stages of grief. And I'm going to mention the 5 stages, but it doesn't mean that we go through them in a linear fashion. So let me go ahead and talk about them. Okay. So she talks about the first one is, again, this it's in order, but grief is not in order. Grief is not linear. Denial. The first stage is like denial, where people refuse to accept the fact that they lost, that they lost someone or something in their life, right? And it could be a numb, like no pasa nada, todo está bien, so like there's that there's a shock, right? And refusing to accept. Y créeme que eso me pasó con la familia. No lo puedo creer que mi ahorita falló. I'm in denial. Family in Mexico que me decía, while I was dealing with everything here, is like, okay, you be in your denial while I have to deal with what's happening. So denial
Because
is one.
the judgment
Sí,
around it's
claro.
it is
Sí,
impressive. ¿Por qué lo hiciste así? We didn't do it that way. You're numb.
yeah,
I went through the
yes,
numbness. I don't remember.
yes.
I don't
Sí,
remember some things of when I
sí,
was going through the first months. I don't.
sí,
But
yeah,
yeah, I agree totally that that's something that you
sí.
go through. And the
Claro, ujú. Estás como en un shock. Yo a veces siento que es como, especialmente para las personas, si perdemos a un ser querido que es tan cerca en nuestra vida, and then we have to coordinate the services. Like that was my case with my grandmother. Oh my God, like no sé cómo Dios y los ancestros me dieron la fortaleza, porque yo lloré antes. I started grieving my grandmother when she stopped eating. That was like I was already crying, like, I was literally, like, a mess, like, no sé, un día estuve hasta gritando, no sé dónde me salió un grito tan hasta que yo me asusté y dije: "¿Qué me está pasando?", y dije: "Oh my God, I'm grieving that I'm gonna lose my grandma, I'm grieving already my
yeah.
grandma's health, that she was transitioning." So, cuando ella falleció, tuve que coordinar y organizar todos sus servicios. Estaba yo tranquila, estaba tranquila, todos los servicios en el funeral, en el camposanto, at the cemetery, and everything was fine. And then I got home to my house y de allí, uf, yo no sé, de allí ya no, I was a mess and I was a mess for like a year,
Well,
pero te da
you
una
experienced
fortaleza, pero that's part of
right.
it, it's like a coping mechanism. Like I knew like I needed to get myself together and like or do the whole services y todo. Ya, soy fuerte, pero en ese momento no es que no quería llorar, simplemente no, estaba yo creo que tan enfocada en los servicios y sí estaba llorando, pero fue fatal en cuanto llegué a mi casa. Es como que no fue a propósito, yo creo que tu cuerpo y tu espíritu lo saben.
Sí, y es esa parte donde you're doing the best of your capability on an experience that is like all sudden. You have to
Yes,
strive, you have to be as strong as possible, but
sí.
then it's like, porque no lloró, o porque lloró mucho, o
Oh, sí,
porque
no le
uh,
dolió, no la
they
quería.
right? Well, they cleaned the house really quick. Well, or they didn't clean the house,
¿Verdad que
or everything around, and it
Ujú.
adds up. Like it's a huge load that you're carrying for time, because again, everybody's gonna make decisions their own way, because a veces
Yeah,
los papás te dicen, if I pass away, I want this and this and this and this done,
yeah.
and you as you respect, right, what the decision was, but then there's like this around you, like, oh no, that she did wrong, or she didn't do it right.
Sí, claro, siempre te van a criticar, ¿sí? Entonces, esa es la primera etapa, ¿no? The first one is like the first a part of the cycle is the denial. The second one is anger. as the masking effects of denial begin to wear off, like first it's like, oh, que no lo aceptas, or you're in shock, then the reality and the pain emerges. You may feel angry. You may direct your anger toward objects, toward things, or even toward people, friends, family. A veces, como dicen, te sale el coraje y no sabes ni de dónde. Y es muy normal. So it's also like, how can you, for what I've learned from I Dr. Jen, she has decolonizing therapy is her Instagram. She calls it sacred rage, and I want to use that. She calls it sacred rage. So instead of anger, I would say sacred rage. It's not this rage that you're carrying, this anger that sometimes it just boils up, or you've had it there and you're going to release it. And sometimes we just got to be very mindful how we release that sacred rage that we have. And sometimes it could be that rage and anger toward the person that even passed away. ¿Por qué te fuiste? You know, or like, o sea, a veces no puedes identificar de dónde viene el coraje, si es de lo que perdiste, si es de la amistad, quién te apoyó, quién no te apoyó, you know, all that stuff. Like, just honor the anger that comes from your loss. That's number 2. Number 3 is she calls it bargaining. This is the grieving person may ruminate on what they could have done differently to prevent the loss. Oh my God. If I would, si hubiera hecho esto, pero si hubiera hecho esto, pero y esto, like you're like sort of like the if only I would have done this, you know, did I make the right decision? Did, you know, eso, that's hard, you know, es como cuando empiezas a cuestionarte, you know, la atención médica que recibieron o que no recibieron, que si, you know, ¿me entiendes? O sea, eso es súper difícil, the ifs. Número 4 es la depresión, depression, right? The feeling like you said when you've lost both your parents, the sadness, the loneliness, and of course, el llorar, el no querer comer, not wanting to, sometimes you feel hopelessness, ¿verdad? Or you feel like la vida ya no tiene sentido. You know, pues claro, la depresión, you know, ya no quieres comer, ya no se te antoja comer, quieres dormir, no puedes dormir, you know, there's different ways that depression, you know, manifests itself. So that's number 4. Number 5 is, this is the final one. It's like llegas a la aceptación, acceptance, right? Is basically, it's like, okay, well, iba a pasar, you know, tarde o temprano íbamos a perder a nuestros seres queridos. Llegaron antes, se fueron antes de lo que esperábamos, de lo que nos hubiera gustado. But it's kind of like coming to terms, right? Accepting that they're no longer with you, and how do you live a life where you continue to honor them, and where, you know, where you not only that you honor them, but that you also allow yourself to find joy and happiness. Because that's the other part of grief, is that grief should be, you have to be sad, tienes que usar negro, tienes que estar triste, no puedes poner música alegre. And grief you can hold grief and show joy and happiness, you know, like necesitas tener ese balance, porque también es la manera de que estás honrando a los seres queridos. So esas son las etapas, and they don't happen in this order. It's not, grief is not linear, you
Y
know.
luego, you feel that you're doing good, pero cualquier cosa triggers you
Sí,
back. It happens
sí,
that when there's anniversary or something that remembers you that day that you had that loss, oh my
yeah,
God, you go downhill otra vez. It's literally
sí,
es un roller coaster.
sí,
Y
it
sí,
is.
you get to a point que de aparte cuestionas a la persona, inclusive you get to a point that you're like, well, you question like who those who believe in God,
Sí,
you know,
sí,
like
claro, sí,
exists, si exists,
sí,
why this happened, and then you
exactly.
feel bad because you know, so I feel that I'm a bad human being because I'm questioning
Sí,
God. So it's like
yes,
this cycle,
yes.
and anger comes and goes. So the purpose of having this conversation is for to open up, and for those that are going through it, open up more. Those that have not had the opportunity to really, they have losses, but they have never had the opportunity to open, como muchas ancestors que tenemos, it's an opportunity to to understand a little bit more and change those patterns that we have from generations and generations in the past.
Sí, claro. Sí, claro, claro que sí. Is, like we had said this earlier, is like accepting, right, the losses that you've experienced in your life, your own, your own identity losses, whatever, that you have gone through, and seeking support and creating community. And community is going to look different for everyone, is community is finding a support system. And you can have different types of community at work, community in your neighborhood, tus comadres, tus compadres, familia, like amistades, o sea, se ocupa todo eso. Y claro, let's normalize going to therapy, for those who have access to therapy. If you're a college student, I really encourage you to go seek the wellness center. They have different names, right? The wellness center at your institution, the mental health center, como se llame, to get therapy and to process what you're going through, because especially as college students, you're juggling so much and you're transitioning, as becoming independent and being away from family and being homesick, and then the academics. And if you're a person of color, there's added stressors associated to that, sense of belonging in this institution. There's so many, challenges. So, like, let's normalize going to therapy. Let's normalize also that self-care is important, right, as part of our grief. And I don't want to say self-care from like the dominant wellness industry of go do a spa day. Yeah, good if you want to, but like self-care is, can you invest 5 minutes of mindful breathing, of disconnecting from all technology and just like being present with Mother Earth, looking at, I don't know, the sky, like going hiking, las cosas tan sencillas, for me, self-care is like, how can I find joy and pleasure in the things that I like? And it doesn't have to be expensive, right? Like, how can you continue to take care of your physical, mental, spiritual, and well-being, so that you can keep showing up in the different roles that you have.
Exactly. Yeah, that is totally a great example what we can do when we're going through that. And we're about to wrap up. Thank you, Hortensia. Any other thought, advice, consejo that you would have for all of us that have gone through any loss, anyone in our audience that is going through it right now? Anything that you could add to it?
Yes. Well, this is Latina Professionals. There's already a community here, right? To elevate and support each other, to reach out and normalize that, I'm having a tough day, and it is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength and courage to be vulnerable and to be selective, of course, who we're vulnerable with, folks that can hold space for that and not shame, but be able to be a support system, right? So, esa es una. La otra is, of course, I'm always, I'm here. I'm on Instagram at Dr. Hortensia Jimenez. Send me a DM if you want to connect in any way that I can support you. I've had many, I haven't shared other stuff, but I've experienced different types of grief, not only losing my father unexpectedly when I was an undergrad, my grandmother, losing pets, losing parts of my identity, and I'll just say it here, like me coming out older in life has been extremely hard, and it took me into very dark places in the last 4 or 5 years, so I grieved my heterosexual life that I was expected to live, and that I have have been grieving that, and that has been painful. So, as someone from the LGBTQ community, we have different sets of challenges. And I'm here vulnerable sharing this with you just to tell folks, like, I've experienced those griefs. I experienced the grief of identity and immigration, of leaving my family behind in Mexico. So, when we talk about grief, let's talk about our intersecting identities in terms of our race or gender, sexuality, or age, or size, todas estas cosas, or social identities impact our grief, impact how we experience grief, and how we show up in the world. So I'm here because I care deeply. So please, let's build community. and I'm here to support each other. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk about this.
No, thank you, and it's much needed. It's a lot of work that we'll have to do within our networks, and be present when you know somebody is going through that. And sometimes you don't need to say anything. You just can send a heart emoji via text, or just say, "I'm here for you.
Yeah.
My brazos están abiertos," and the person will let you know when they are ready to get that hug in person, or
Yeah.
when they respond with another heart emoji. But they just knowing that there's somebody thinking about you
Yes.
makes a difference. And
Claro.
again, having gone through that in a very lonely way, it's a recommendation I can give. I can only thank you, and wish you the best of luck with your book, with your Instagram page, with your classes, with anything that you're doing. You're amazing, Hortensia. And thank you, everybody, to have joined us today. We will be having a lot more events here in California, Central Valley, as well as Latina Professionals National. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. If you're going through grief, if you're going through a difficult time, know that you have a community here. A lot of us have gone through it, and you're always welcome to reach out.
Claro que
Thank you, and I hope everybody has an amazing day and a rest of the week. Bye,
gracias.
everyone. Thank you.
Vemos.